Hello, and welcome to this session of the UICC World Cancer Leaders Summit. I'm Dr. Amy Moore, Vice President of Global Engagement and Patient Partnerships for LUNGevity Foundation here in the United States. I'm delighted to have with me today Antonella Cardone, Director of the European Cancer Patient Coalition, and Dr. Gilberto Lopez, Professor of Clinical Medicine at the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of Miami. Before we get into today's discussion, I'll be sharing some slides highlighting LUNGevity's work in the areas of precision medicine and biomarker testing. Optimal care for lung cancer is driven by precision medicine, and LUNGevity defines precision medicine as biomarker-driven from pre-diagnosis all the way out through diagnosis, staging, and treatment, as well as progression. And we have programs along this entire care continuum spectrum. Our goal is to ensure that every patient gets access to the right test at the right time so that they can get put on the right treatment. And we know that precision medicine has multiple components, again, spanning the care continuum from screening and early detection to the early stage disease setting, where it's used for monitoring for recurrence and minimal residual disease after surgery, as well as in the advanced stage disease setting, where biomarker testing is used for diagnosis and treatment matching, as well as for, at the time of recurrence, in treatment matching. This timeline just shows you the advances in precision medicine that have occurred in the lung cancer landscape since the early 2000s. And while I don't expect you to be able to read all the content here, it just highlights the fact that LUNGevity has been actively engaged in precision medicine initiatives and in biomarker testing since 2015. So we are actively engaged in multiple initiatives to address these needs, including various policy efforts to promote this work. So in each of these areas, LUNGevity is promoting research, both translational research into early detection and therapeutics, research to uncover gaps and barriers to develop meaningful interventions and programs, collaborating with global stakeholders to address pan-cancer precision medicine needs. We have various education and awareness campaigns to promote biomarker testing and precision medicine awareness, both for patients and providers. We're working to harmonize language around biomarker testing and precision medicine for our stakeholders. And then in the lens of health equity, we're also working to expand access to biomarker testing and precision medicine for vulnerable populations. I want to touch on just a couple of our program updates for 2021-2022. My colleague, Nikki Martin, is leading the formation of a working group around consistent testing terminology. We want to ensure that there's a unified voice around the concepts of biomarker testing, genetic testing for inherited mutations, genetic testing for inherited cancer risk. And as you can see there on the right, we're working with a number of stakeholders around the world to achieve this work. And you can learn more at the website listed on the left. Project Direct is our effort to understand the barriers to accessing biomarker testing by underserved vulnerable populations. So we have multiple phases of this project, but the goal is that we can develop a patient and clinician-approved intervention to bridge these gaps and make sure that these vulnerable populations have access to this critical testing. Again, I mentioned that we're working to improve the readability of biomarker testing reports. We know that this is a critical need, not only for patients, but for providers as well. So we're working to address these needs for all groups and working with labs and diagnostic companies to ensure that the reports meet the oncologist needs, that the reports keep up to date with an ever-changing landscape, and that they're taking that complex information and making it digestible both for patients and for the providers. Earlier this year, we launched our No One Missed campaign, which is a large-scale public education campaign to drive essential education around comprehensive biomarker testing in lung cancer patients at any stage. And we're doing this with a number of partners in the lung cancer community. To date, we're very proud of the metrics that we've achieved with this campaign. We have 57 million media impressions and are well on our way to our end of year goal, as well as 1,600 media placements. So that conveys that this fills an important need in the biomarker testing and precision medicine landscape, and that people are very receptive to the need for comprehensive biomarker testing in the lung cancer community. I want to turn to our discussion with our guest of honor today. Antonella Cardone, and Dr. Gilberto Lopez. So welcome, both of you. Thank you for making time to be with us as part of the World Cancer Leaders Summit.
Thank you, Amy.
Yes, thank you. So Dr. Lopez, I want to start with you because obviously you're a thoracic oncologist. So I want to get your perspective first on how precision medicine and biomarker testing has impacted the care of your patients with lung cancer specifically, and what have you seen over the last decade or so as far as the trends in this area?
Without a doubt, the last 10 years have been fundamental and transformative in what we do for our patients with non-small cell lung cancer in particular, but now for patients with small cell lung cancer. In the past, we used to be very envious of our colleagues that treated patients with breast cancer because of the number of different biomarkers that they had that allowed them to select the best treatment for each patient that they were seeing at the time they were seeing the patient, be it in the adjuvant setting, in the metastatic setting, or as you discussed a little earlier today, in terms of minimal residual disease and monitoring therapies. And now we even have new markers coming into the screening. And that's not something we're going to be discussing a lot today because it's not standard of care yet, but it does give us a glimpse of what the future will bring. And without a doubt, in lung cancer, this has changed the way we approach the disease and has changed not just the length of life, but especially the quality of life of our patients. We have gone from treating everybody with advanced disease the same way, with a combination of usually 2 classic chemotherapy agents with the associated side effects that brought, but especially not with a lot of good responses and responses that were usually short-lived. Today, we have a number of different biomarkers that we can test either by simpler tests like immunohistochemistry or by more complex technology platforms like next-generation sequencing. And we can actually tailor treatment for each patient based on those changes. And with new developments and new treatments and new markers that are coming along, probably about 40 to 50% of patients in the US and Western Europe today actually do have a marker or do have a driver mutation that we can try to target. Also, we have developed new treatments for patients that do not have those driver mutations, and that used to be the biggest gap. And today we have also markers that will help us see which patients of those that don't have driver mutations are likely to benefit more from immunotherapy plus minus chemotherapy approaches, which are the usual option we have for patients that do not have driver mutations. So without a doubt, things have changed markedly for the better. And we hope that this is just the beginning because we still have a lot of ground to cover. We still have a lot of improvements to bring forward. And hopefully in 10 years, we won't recognize even what we do today.
That's so important, everything you just said. And it's exciting, I think gratifying for those of us in the lung cancer space to see the progress and the momentum we have. And so just to reinforce the point, how critical is biomarker testing for newly diagnosed patients with lung cancer?
We should not treat anyone today without biomarker testing. It makes a huge difference in terms of quality of life, in terms of the length of life that patients can have. And we really can tailor therapies based on these markers. So every single patient with advanced non-small cell lung cancer today, and some patients in the adjuvant setting, should definitely get biomarker testing.
So you're also a leader in global oncology and lead Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center's efforts in this space. And so I want to now transition into thinking about precision medicine and biomarker testing in the context of low and middle income countries. And so we know a key, as you just said, biomarker testing is essential for quality lung cancer care and matching patients to the right treatment at the right time. But what are some of the best practices that you've seen perhaps in low and middle income countries? And then also, what are some of the ongoing challenges where collectively we as a global body can really work and try to make progress? So
unfortunately, what I just mentioned that we can do in the US with outcomes that have improved markedly with median survivals in trials now measured in years rather than just months, we really see that as hope for the future, but not necessarily the reality for those of us that see patients in low and middle income countries, and also in certain settings that are lower resource in high income countries as well. It's not just in low and middle income countries that we see disparities, number one, and that we see lack of access to testing. A new study at ASCO this year showed that even in the US, in community oncology settings, not everybody that should be getting tested does get tested. So that's something that we have to improve even here where we practice in the United States. But when we do go to low and middle income countries, the situation gets harder and equity and access becomes a major issue. When you go to Latin America, for instance, which is the area in the world that I have practiced the most and I have the most contacts and still have the most projects, it is a very difficult situation. Public healthcare systems around the region have difficulty being able to do testing. Some will be able to do testing that is a little simpler and cheaper, such as using immunohistochemistry, which is possible for some of our markers like EGFR, ALK, and PD-L1, and that's a cheaper way, costing just a few $100s versus thousands of dollars when we do next generation sequencing. But most countries also have private healthcare systems that are better funded. And in those, we do see a greater use of the biomarkers that we would tend to see in the US. And biomarker testing is just the first barrier, because once you do know that a patient has that specific driver mutation, you need to get access to the drug. And access to first generation drugs, such as EGFR inhibitors, such as erlotinib or gefitinib, or ALK inhibitors, such as crizotinib, are starting to become generic. So we are seeing more competition. Price has come down in many different countries, and that has helped with access, including in the public healthcare system in a number of different nations. But when we really look at latest generation drugs and we see third generation EGFR inhibitors or newer generation ALK inhibitors, because the cost becomes even more prohibitive, it is very difficult for patients to be able to have access to these these newer drugs, if you will. So we have an issue not just with getting tested for biomarkers, but also then once you do know you have a biomarker, to get the actual drug that will give patients the best outcomes. And that's only looking at the universe of advanced disease. We're not talking about CT scans for screening and all the things that we should be doing in low and middle income countries so that we can actually control the lung cancer epidemic.
That's a hugely important point, and thank you for making that. You know, in my role with LUNGevity, we're working to understand really the global landscape and how we can leverage some of the work that I highlighted to really expand access and availability to some of these life-saving services. I know you also have expertise around health economics and thinking about health policy. So from your perspective, what are some of the ways in which we can think about these barriers and can take action maybe to start chipping away at them more from a regulatory or policy perspective? What are you most encouraged about or maybe see as the biggest hurdle to overcome?
Just like politics, health economics, all health economics is local. So it depends on the local situation, depends on local pricing, local healthcare systems, what each society is willing to pay for a new technology, and how can we actually spread that not just through a small group of individuals that can pay for private health insurance, but also for the national healthcare systems, public healthcare systems at large. So I have no doubt, and we and others have shown that a lot of these drugs, if they are used by coupling them with biomarkers, not only do you make them more cost effective in terms of bringing them into a healthcare system, but also when we develop new agents, if we co-develop them with biomarkers so that you select those patients who benefit the most, you also make drug development cheaper, quicker, and also more cost effective. So there's a lot of benefits into using biomarkers and into using precision medicine as we move forward in lung cancer. Having said that, given costs not just of testing, but especially of new drugs, we really need new models to be able to bring these drugs and these biomarker testings into the lowest of low income countries and low middle income countries. High middle income countries can usually fence for themselves and can usually get access at least to the basics and to the essential medicines list. But when we really look at low income countries and lower middle income countries, we need new models. And as UICC, we are working on creating such a new model that I still can't disclose, but hopefully by the moment we get to the conference, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about it. And in the future, hopefully next year, we'll be able to launch this initiative that we hope will help increase access to medications in low-income and lower middle-income countries.
That's fantastic. And it is important for our audience to know that you serve on UICC's board, correct? So you're deeply involved in this work. So thank you for your efforts. And now I want to segue into understanding more of the picture of what's going on in Europe. So Antonella Cardone, we're so glad you could be with us. You're the director of the European Cancer Patient Coalition. And I know that earlier this year, ECPC released a white paper talking about some of this work, and particularly the role of biomarker testing and its role in sustainability of healthcare. So I'd like to start with you, and maybe you can share some of the highlights from ECPC's white paper and what's going on in Europe. So welcome.
Thank you, and thank you to UICC for inviting me to speak on a so relevant topic for cancer patients. Before getting into the white paper, I would like to say just a few words as of introduction to ECPC, which is the European Cancer Patient Coalition, and it is the largest cancer patient umbrella organization in Europe, with over 450 members in 50 countries. So we cover the whole of Europe, plus at least one member in each continent. And our main goal is to make sure that all cancer patients have the same access to quality treatment, cancer treatment, along throughout their life. So this explains why we are working on this issue, on the issue of precision oncology medicine and personalized cancer treatment, which is the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. And this is so important to cancer patients, but not only to cancer patients. As we already heard, precision oncology is very beneficial to patients, physicians, regulatory authorities, and payers. So it benefits patients by leading to a higher therapeutic efficacy and potentially fewer side effects, resulting in a better quality of life. It benefits physicians by making it easier to choose the right therapy. And it benefits regulatory authorities by making risk-benefit assessment more precise, and it benefits payers because available resources can be used more efficiently by potentially reducing the number of additional or ineffective treatments. And with improved biomarker testing and access to personalized cancer therapies, there is a real potential to improve patient outcomes while lowering overall healthcare costs. We've heard this before. And seeking the most effective treatment for each patient within a country's economic limits can contribute to healthcare sustainability and minimize the impact of healthcare budgets. And this is very important, as I could even add an additional benefit to healthcare systems. So we have worked on this white paper together with Fight Bladder Cancer and Onco Health Institute. And the white paper identifies a number of hurdles to improving access to diagnostic testing. So first of all, one size does not fit all. And in fact, the heterogeneity of healthcare systems around the world, along with mixed availability of diagnostic technologies and infrastructure at time of diagnosis, all complicate access to pan-tumor medicines. And there is a low awareness of biomarker testing's opportunity among government and regulatory policymakers, clinicians, and patient advocates of the concept of pan-tumor medicines and the value this brings to patients. So we are concluding the white paper with a call to action. So we call for improving biomarker literacy through educational activities about the economic and clinical value of testing, sharing best practices, ensuring patients' inclusivity in informed decision-making. We call on position diagnostic testing as integral to regulatory frameworks by championing the cause for improved access to diagnostic testing to be included in regulatory and healthcare frameworks. And keep evaluating outputs to measure value and cost effectiveness of testing. Then we call to listen to the science. Utilizing new science, clinical data and treatment advances as a bedrock of discussions. Work with medical associations and regulators to include testing in trial protocols. And then we call to collaborate with professional and political experts. So that we can put biomarker testing high on the political and scientific agendas, work with cancer centers and patient advocates, be realistic, small steps make a difference, and petition for allocation of resources to fund more testing.
It's so gratifying to see how much alignment there is between our efforts and your efforts in Europe. A lot of common themes here, and so that's exciting. I know, Antonella, that ECPC also recently conducted a survey of biomarker testing practices in Europe. And as Dr. Lopez alluded to at ASCO earlier this year, we heard of some of the ongoing challenges here in the US just related to the uptake of biomarker testing in community settings. So we still have a long way to go even here in the US, but I'm curious to hear some of the results from your survey to get a snapshot of what biomarker testing practices look like in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. So biomarker testing has become a critical tool to ensure the optimal delivery of care for cancer patients. However, access to high quality biomarker tests is inconsistent across Europe. So the myth that standardized biomarker testing infrastructures across Europe ensure patients have equal access to testing regardless of where they live has been our guiding principle through a research that we have conducted together with the IQN Path and the FPIA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry Associations. And we have developed this research based on a literature review on 58 quality interviews and on a survey developed with 141 laboratory managers and 1,665 patients across Europe and the UK. The result is very far from the myth. So the reality is that across Europe, we have huge discrepancies, inequalities in facilitating access to high quality biomarker testing. The countries which are doing better are the countries in North and West Europe, while the countries that are doing the worst are the countries in some of the Eastern European countries, where structural changes are required in order to facilitate access to biomarker testing. We call for the development of task forces at national and European level, so to make sure that biomarker testing is accessible equally across Europe. So in summary, we believe that it is necessary to partner with medical regulators and associations to call for standardized testing, and we believe that it's important to position diagnostic testing as integral to regulatory frameworks with the ongoing measurement of value and cost effectiveness of testing. It's important to enhance physician and patient education about the value of comprehensive biomarker and genomic testing, sharing best practice and ensuring patients' inclusivity in decision-making. And it's important to improve funding for testing through greater collaboration with professional and political experts while remaining realistic about what can be achieved. Thank you.
That's a really comprehensive approach to tackling the problem of comprehensive biomarker testing. And I appreciate your efforts and those of ECPC and your partners. You know, as Dr. Lopez and I were talking about, lung cancer has really been almost the poster child for comprehensive biomarker testing and precision medicine. We're seeing, you know, great advances in understanding, you know, lung cancer not as a single disease, but as many different diseases for which we have now a growing armamentarium of precision medicines that are improving outcomes for patients. So, you know, obviously ECPC is much more focused on pan-cancer initiatives and kind of tumor agnostic approaches. And so I'm curious how we can leverage ECPC's work to really think about precision medicine and biomarker testing, you know, in that wider lens of, you know, because we know the field is moving away from, you know, the tumor of origin into understanding the molecular underpinnings of disease. So what do you see as the best opportunities for how we, maybe in disease-specific arenas, can partner with organizations such as yours to advance our common goals?
Well, first of all, that is our main goal. As we are not focusing on one specific cancer, and actually this is what makes us different from any other cancer patient organization in Europe, that we work on all cancer types from the rarest to the most common. So what we normally do is to learn from the best practice in one cancer area or even in one disease area, and we leverage this best practice as a lesson learned for other cancer areas. And normally we do this with our members through developing fact sheets, through developing capacity building, essentially through webinars, events, meetings. We also work a lot with policymakers. Currently, we are managing the first parliamentary intergroup in Brussels on cancer called Challenge Cancer. So we work a lot at policy level with the European Parliament and the European Commission. And so this is something that we could help you doing. The thing is that we too often give it for granted that policymakers know what we're talking about, but unfortunately they don't. So as I mentioned before, we need to raise awareness, not only among patients, cancer patients, but also among politicians, policymakers. And this is something that we can do together. We can help you achieving this goal. And for instance, in Europe now we have the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, that has been launched last February. It's still in the preliminary phase, like we do not have a roadmap. The implementation has not started yet. But within this plan, strategic plan, I could say, we are planning to have a stronger focus on biomarker testing. Hopefully, we will manage to set up a task force to support the implementation of the plan with a stronger focus on biomarker testing. And this is something that we definitely welcome a collaboration with the UICC.
So, Dr. Lopez, I'm curious to get your perceptions on Antonella's presentation. My take is that there's a lot of coordination in European countries and, creation of task forces and a lot of resources to deploy. And I'm curious, in low and middle income countries, perhaps that's not always the case. And I'm wondering, in terms of, and even I would say for organizations like mine, patient advocacy groups, that maybe there's not as many of those in these lower middle income countries. So what is the opportunity to, have organizations like a LUNGevity or other patient-driven organizations to really come in and support, some of this conversation we're having around improving biomarker testing, precision medicine. So just curious to get your sense as to how this compares to the picture that we're seeing in Europe. Sorry, you're on mute.
Without a doubt, civil society is very well organized and a lot more advanced in Western Europe than what we usually see in low-income countries, but it's not a desert in low-income countries as well. In certain places, when you look at Colombia, when you look at Brazil, there's a number of patient associations and support groups that actually work with parliamentary actors and with policymakers in general to try to make things better for patients with cancer. And in Brazil, for instance, patient support groups have led to changing legislation that now makes it so that patients have to start treatment within the public healthcare system within 60 days of their diagnosis. And there's a lot of lobbying and discussions to try to make oral drugs accessible as well, not just in the private healthcare system, but in the public. So there is a nascent, or in some countries, even well-developed civil society groups that already have those relationships. Some of these have been created with groups from the US, actually training centers, especially in Latin America. In Asia, we see the situation a little bit behind and we don't have as many groups, but there are groups that are coming forward and are starting to help in places like Singapore, the Philippines, and other countries as well. So without a doubt, this is a model that has to be used a lot more often than it is today in low-income countries, because it does have the potential to bring more stakeholders to the table so that we can improve access to biomarker testing and targeted agents.
That's good to know. So I know we're coming up on our last few minutes here, and I just wanted to maybe conclude with some final thoughts.
Goes by too fast.
Time goes so fast. There's so much rich content here and exciting work that you're both doing. But I want to get maybe your final thoughts on what you're most encouraged about in terms of, the deployment of biomarker testing and precision medicine on a global scale. So Dr. Lopez, let's start with you.
What keeps me moving is the patients I see at every one of my clinics. When we look back 10 years ago, every other patient was having progression of disease or lots of symptoms because of their lung cancer. Today, and I just had clinic yesterday morning, and of the 15 patients I saw in the morning, 13 were actually doing very well. And we had a normal conversation as you would have with somebody that you know, or a neighbor or a friend. They were doing fantastic with their drugs. It's not true for every patient. I wouldn't want to make it look like it's better than it is. The situation is still so that many patients will not have a target or will not respond to therapy. But those that do can actually have a very good quality of life for not just a few months, but sometimes years. And that's what we need to improve upon. We have already come a long way, but we still have a very, very long path in front of us to truly make lung cancer a chronic disease. And to do that, we need a holistic approach. It's not just going to be with genomic testing and targeted agents and immunotherapy, even though that is extremely important. We went from having 5-year survival for lung cancer of less than 3-4% for patients with metastatic disease to now getting up to 15 and maybe 20% for patients that had targeted agents or immunotherapy. But that means that 80% of our patients are still not having a normal length of life. And that is what we need to change. So we need a lot more money to be invested in researching lung cancer, as well as in not just tobacco control, which most countries around the world have done a superb job. Today, when you look at places like Brazil, barely 10% of the population smoke, but 10% of the population is still 20 million plus people. So we still have work to do in tobacco control. We have a lot really left to do in terms of screening patients for lung cancer. And of course, we do need to create the systems so that we can do early diagnosis and cure a lot more patients than we cure today. So to make that happen, to make lung cancer a chronic disease, or to make lung cancer history, we still have a lot of work ahead of us.
So true, but thank you for those encouraging notes, and I look forward to working with you to achieve some of those. Antonella, from your perspective, what are you most encouraged about that we've talked about?
Yeah, well, biomarker testing used to be science fiction a few years ago. Today is a reality, but I mean, it's a reality, but what struggles me is that it's inconceivable that a reality that saves lives, that can help saving lives, saves money and all that, still it is not as spread as it should be as a practice. And I mean, we still have too many cancer patients not able to access biomarker testing, high quality biomarker testing. So that is something that we need to work together, unite forces in order to make sure that more and more cancer patients can access this innovative, but not so innovative anymore, diagnostic tool.
Well, thank you both for your time, for your insights, for your expertise, for being world cancer leaders in service of patients around the globe to improve outcomes for a global citizenry. And I wish you well in your work and look forward to ongoing conversations and collaborations. So take care, wish you well, and have a good conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.